Hey, here's a scary thought. This is you. Or at least it's you if you were cut in half. Academically speaking, of course. Inside you, there are bones, hardworking organs, endless thoughts, and a little feeling called fear. Now, I'm not talking about late night horror, jump out of your seat fear. No, I'm talking about the everyday stuff. The fear of rejection before we even try and ask someone out. The fear of failure before we try our hand at something new. It's the hesitation that we get not from reality, but because of the fear that we feel. Fear is an emotion that's always hiding in the background, waiting to strike. Sometimes it's small and short-lived. It's that little jolt you get when you're around a corner and almost bump into someone. Other times it's slow, it has weight to it, always looming in the background. As a pretty anxious person growing up, fear for me has always been an everyday emotion, but lately, sort of in an attempt to try and understand it a little bit better, I wanted to take more of a deep dive into what fear is, our relationship with it, and why sometimes fear is a good thing and why it can actually help us to move forward. From academic historians to video game designers to philosophy authors to even yourself, fear affects everyone, and it has a pretty interesting story. So let's get into it. Number 1, the anatomy of fear. Let's start out with what fear is, especially on a biological level, because fear isn't just a feeling, it's actually a safety mechanism. It's a full body response. And whenever your brain perceives some kind of threat, it sets off a whole long list of responses to try and protect you from this threat. This all starts in a little almond-shaped structure in your brain called the amygdala. It's your internal alarm system. The second it senses danger, it alerts the rest of your brain and body, hey, something's not right. Then your hypothalamus takes over, which fires up a part of your nervous system. That's when your heart starts racing, your palms get sweaty, and your pupils dilate. You might have heard of this as the fight or flight response, though scientists have now added a few more options, such as freeze and even fawn, which is kind of like people-pleasing your way out of danger. So when you start getting nervous before you have to do some public speaking or you're anxious about a job interview, your body is going to react as though you're being chased by a lion. That is why your hands start shaking. That's why your heart rate goes up, because your body is trying to protect you from something. It just can't really figure out that that thing might just be a harmless PowerPoint presentation. In fact, fear is so ancient and primal that it often overrides your rational brain. That's why it's hard to just calm down when you're scared. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking, essentially gets hijacked by the amygdala. It's not a lack of willpower, it's biology. So fear isn't just in your head, it's in your body. But the good news is that just like you can train a muscle, you can also train your brain. And that is how we grow. But luckily nowadays we can use technology to really help us get out of our own way. And one of the most powerful tools I found for doing exactly that comes in the form of Ghost, who are kindly sponsoring this video. Years ago, back when I was still a student, I started a small blog. It was nothing fancy, just a few scattered thoughts and the occasional late night rant. But hitting publish on those posts, that was terrifying. It felt like showing people a side of myself I usually kept hidden. Some of the most common fears often reported on surveys all have to do with putting yourself out there, but Ghost simplifies this process and gives you the tools to fight your fears head on. On paper, it's an open source platform for publishing blogs and newsletters, but more than that, it's a space to express yourself online and grow it into something meaningful, with Ghost also offering ways through which you can monetize your ideas and creations as you become more and more emboldened. Unlike a lot of the noisy ad-filled corners of the internet, Ghost is actually run by a non-profit. Their mission isn't to sell distractions, they actually care about helping creators share meaningful work and get out of their own way. Whether you want to start a personal blog, build a writing habit, or just practice putting your ideas into the world, Ghost makes it easy. I'll drop a link down below where you can try out Ghost for free, but if the idea of putting yourself out there feels scary, don't worry. So did my first blog post, so did my first video, and so did pretty much everything after that. But every bit of courage has to start somewhere, and personally, I recommend starting it with Ghost. Number 2, the practical side of fear. According to historian Robert Pickham, throughout most of history, fear wasn't just a response, it was a strategy. Kings, churches, and governments knew that fear was one of the most powerful ways to keep people in check, because if you can control what someone fears, you can often control what they do. Take heliocentrism, the idea that the Earth revolves around the sun. We take it for granted now, but for centuries, this idea was considered heresy, not because it lacked evidence, but because it went against the church's teachings. To believe in heliocentrism was to risk everything, your reputation, your livelihood, even your life. And so many scientists of the time either hid their findings or were severely punished for sharing them. It's the oldest trick in the book. If you want to keep people in line, don't just give them rules, give them consequences. Fear is a lot more powerful than logic, and often just the implication of possible shame or failure or just some kind of negative consequence if we don't do something a certain way is enough to keep us kind of controlled. But the tricky part is that often we use this idea against ourselves. Now, obviously, most of us aren't being hunted down for our astronomy takes, or at least I hope not, but this fear still shows up, and it shows up in quieter ways. It's when you hold back in a meeting, even if you feel like you have something meaningful to say, or it's when you don't even apply for a job because you've already told yourself they won't even look at my application. Some part of you has already run this simulation in your head and basically decided that this won't end well. And this is something that we might call being realistic or being practical. But let's be honest, a lot of the times we're just being scared. But as the author Ryan Holiday points out in Courage is Calling, being scared is not the same as being afraid. Being scared is a reaction. Being afraid means living in fear. It's okay to experience fear, but it's not okay to let it stop you, especially when greater things are on the other side of that fear. Often we get more in our own way than actual failure. Philosophers like Kierkegaard and Sartre talked about this too. They saw fear not just as a reaction to danger, but as a sign that you're standing on the edge of possibility. Fear, they argued, is proof that something matters. If you weren't scared, you wouldn't care. Fear, in that sense, is more of a signal. It shows you when something matters, because you don't get anxious or fearful about something that you don't care about. You only feel the fear when there are real stakes involved. And so we can kind of look at it more as something that points us either towards something that matters or away from something that matters. Toward the moments where you might stretch or risk or grow. And yes, growth can be uncomfortable and scary, but so is staying small. So is waking up 5 years from now and realizing that fear is still holding the steering wheel. The question is not how can I be fearless? The question we should be asking is how do I do this? How do I push forward despite the fear? If you are feeling fearful about something, it might be an indication that you are on the verge of something interesting, which brings me to the final point. Number 3, how to control your fear. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that intentionally freaks people out. I'm talking about horror games. Have you ever wondered why people willingly play games that make them scream, sweat, and question their life choices? Why do people pay money to be scared out of their minds? It's because when fear is framed as a challenge, it actually becomes exhilarating. Game designers know this. Fear in games is rarely about being powerless. It's about tension and release. The flickering hallway lights, the creaking doors, the enemy you know is behind you. These moments create an atmosphere where you're always on edge, but also where every little victory feels massive. It's you versus the unknown, and the moment you survive it, something inside you changes. In psychology, this is often called stress inoculation. It's the idea that exposing yourself to small, controlled doses of fear actually helps you to build resilience to it. People who enjoy horror, suspense, and thrillers tend to be better at emotional regulation in real life. They've practiced sitting with discomfort. They've, in a sense, rehearsed fear. And here's the cool thing. This doesn't just apply to haunted mansions and jump scares in video games, because life is kind of its own type of game. Starting a new job, moving to a new city, falling for someone, all of these things are scary quests. You will probably feel underleveled, unsure, you probably won't get through it unscathed, but you show up anyway. In games, we don't resent the fear, we expect it, we even embrace it, because that's what makes the win feel earned. So why don't we do the same in real life? When I published my first blog post, I almost felt sick. When I published my first video, I almost deleted it 10 times. But after a while, you get used to sort of moving with the fear instead of against it. And every time you do that, you kind of gain a little something, a little bit more courage, a little bit more confidence, and kind of a better sense of what you can actually do. We tend to imagine catastrophe, but more often than not, reality will just kind of hand you mild inconvenience. And the moment you can look at fear and say, you know what, this is scary, but I'm going to do it anyway. And if it doesn't work out, I will still be okay. That is when fear really starts to lose its grip. It never really goes away entirely, but it becomes quieter, smaller. It takes up less space in your life. So how do you control your fear? You remind yourself that fear is more of a signal as opposed to a stop sign. Obviously, sometimes it's good to be scared of something and to not go for something, but more often than not, especially in our day-to-day lives, fear isn't actually that useful of an emotion. And the more we can expose ourselves to it, the more we can build that resilience. And over time, you sort of learn to just move forward despite it. Because fear will continue to be there, but so will you. It will never get easy, but it will get familiar. And I think that might just be enough. So with all that being said, I hope you enjoyed. Stay courageous out there, and I'll see you in the next one.